Welcome to the Federal Demonstration Partnership's Wizard demonstration. As it sort of sounds, the Federal Demonstration Partnership is a group of universities and federal agencies that work together to try and make things work more smoothly when it comes to things like grants. For a long time, this agency really worked on sort of the backroom stuff, the stuff that the sponsored programs offices did and the forms they had to fill out. And in the past few years, we've really taken an initiative to try and make life easier for faculty members. And this is the first project that we're running, and we call projects demonstrations, where we're trying to ease the burden for faculty members. And this is a demonstration to look at allowing faculty members to self-determine the exempt status for their human subjects research. My name is Jane McCutcheon. I'm a faculty member at the New York University. I'm also the instigator of this project. And my hope is, by walking you through the first few slides of this, and I think this is going to be about 20 minutes long, it will take away some of the unknown factor and make people more willing to try this wizard. For the demonstration project, we are doing a comparison between what people get putting their project through the wizard with what people get putting their project through an IRB. And we're just not getting a good enough response rate that we're going to get the data that we need so that this can become a real thing. So I'm going to talk a few minutes about the principles of the wizard. First of all, in order to get both the federal government and then IRBs to buy into this, we have had to stick with regulatory language. Now, as a faculty member, I know that very few faculty speak regulatory. So what we've done is we've added in definitions and examples where we can. We did this on a shoestring budget, so it's not like something where you can hold your mouse over a word and up pop the definitions, because that's not shoestring. So it's kind of packed in there as text. And I'll also talk you through some of this for the first few slides that we're going to cover that will maybe help you get the rhythm of it. One of the reasons that IRBs were resistant, and the federal government was resistant to the idea that investigators could self-determine exempt, is because there wasn't a way to document it. And you don't want somebody to just decide their project is exempt and go off and do it. What this wizard does is it copies down every single solitary answer that you make into an Excel spreadsheet. So then in the future, your IRB could look and say, oh yes, you know, they went through the wizard, yes, it really is exempt, and everything is fine. It's a measure, it's a means that they need to have in order to be able to control who's doing what. That said, you can't go backwards. So that if you get an answer that gives you something that is not an exempt determination and you want it to be exempt, you can't go back and change your answer. Just like you can't resubmit your IRB application over and over and over again until you get the determination that you want. So be aware, if you decide that you gave the wrong answer, you're going to end up at the beginning. You can't go back. For the demonstration, as I've said, it's a comparison between what you did for your regular IRB application and what that same project gets as a determination on the wizard. It's anonymous, and so although the first page has fields for names, because eventually you'll need to be able to put your name into this if we go forward with it, that's all blocked out. And so we've circled the parts that you're actually going to be able to fill out. It's not that much. I've done this a number of times. We've had experienced investigators take projects through this. I've also taken investigators who've done one IRB application in their entire life, and they get through this wizard in about 20 minutes. So although it seems kind of daunting in the beginning, it really doesn't take that long. And I'm hoping that you remember that if you do this now and the project works, then you'll be able to do this in the future and you won't have to spend time waiting for your IRB to decide whether or not your project is exempt. Some of the questions are rather situation specific, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that in a couple of slides. But you need to answer the questions based on the study that you're doing, which is sometimes not quite the same as the answer that you'd give generally. And then, because a lot of the regulations don't really protect subjects in exempt research, The Belmont report does a better job. It protects against coercive recruitment, which is not ever written in the regulations. We've put in what I call soft stops. You get to a point, and it may be that your project is exempt, but it's really a situation where you want a human being to look at something that you're doing and say, okay, yeah, that's fine, or maybe the way you're recruiting isn't the way we want you to recruit. So there are soft stops in this. So the first page of the wizard, that once you've typed in your username, the username and password, is this page. And you see the parts that are circled. So first name, it says my first. And if you try and change that, nothing is going to happen. So the places that are blank, and they're also bold and underlined, and in this, they're circled. They won't be circled on what you see if you do the wizard. We need your institution. We need a project description. We need whatever your university gave you for a study ID, and then we need your project title. And the rest of this, which isn't circled and is not bold and blank, you don't fill out. So the people who are going to look at the results later on are not going to know who you are doing this specific project. So it's as anonymous as we can make it. After you fill that out and you go to the next slide, you start off with a question about activity. And what some of you may know, and most of you probably don't know, is that not everything involving humans meets the definition of human subjects research. So in order to need IRB oversight, you first have to meet the definitions of research, Boolean logic, and human subjects. So the first question that we want to ask is, are you doing what the federal government considers to be research? And the two key phrases in this first sentence are systematic, generalizable knowledge. So not everything one does is systematic. I mean, there's a perfectly legitimate kind of research that's a case report. You see something unusual in a single individual, you write it up, you publish it. That's a perfectly acceptable kind of research, but an N of 1 is not systematic. Is it generalizable knowledge? Well, here at NYU, we have a Center for Individual Studies. And one of the projects that they wondered if they needed human subjects was a student who was going to interview herself and 2 of her family members about a unique situation that happened to them. Well, if it's a unique situation that happened to them, it's not generalizable knowledge. So by the federal definitions of systematic and generalizable knowledge, if you don't meet both of those, you do not need IRB oversight. So for purposes of this seminar, we're going to assume that you've said yes, because otherwise your IRB would have told you that you didn't need human subjects oversight. So you meet the definition of research, and so you say yes, and you'll go to the next slide, which is activity is research. And here's the definition of human subjects. Are you obtaining private information about living individuals? Because you can get information from an individual that's not about the individual. So if you're going to call up companies and ask them how many widgets they make, that's not information about the person on the phone. If you ask them what's their opinion of the widgets that they make, now you're getting information about them. So if you're not collecting opinions and you're getting information from an individual that's not about that person, then you do not meet the definition of human subjects. You'd say no. The wizard or your IRB would have said, well, you don't meet the definition of human subjects, you don't need human subjects oversight. Since you're here, you said yes, and as you can see at the bottom of the slide, yes means we're going to go on to the next page. The next question is basically asking you what you're doing. And so really, are you going to be touching, talking to, or looking at existing data about a person? Touching, talking to, or existing data about a person. And then we have a bunch of definitions in there, what intervention means, what private information includes. So basically, so let's take the no example first. So if you're going to look at data that's already on the shelf, and you have no way of identifying the individuals from whom that data came. So you're getting data from a colleague, you're doing de-identified chart reviews, and you say no, we'd go to the next slide, which we'll do in a minute. If you're going to touch a person, if you're going to interview a person, if you're going to contact a person in some way, shape, or form, if you're going to get previously acquired data but the identifiers are still with it, then you answer yes. The next question is, do you have a non-research relationship with the study population? And this is a situation-specific answer. So let's say you're a physician or a social worker or a psychiatrist who's doing a chart review on your own patients. Now, you're not going to recruit your patients by asking them if it's all right for you to do a chart review. Generally, it's not considered necessary to get patients to do chart reviews. So although they are your patients, since you're not going to be recruiting them for your chart review study, you should say no. And that's a situation-specific answer. If you're going to be recruiting patients or your students or your clients or your whatevers, then you have a non-research relationship with those people and you should answer yes. And here's a soft stop, all right? Because recruitment could be coercive. You know, you're a faculty member and you want to use your own students for your research and you think that you should be able to tell them that they're going to participate in the research study without giving the consent form, or you expect them to say they're going to consent before you've given them a grade. That's considered coercive recruitment. And so we want another person to look at recruiting before we go ahead and say, yes, you're exempt. So you still may be exempt, but before you go any farther in the form, you need to make a phone call to your IRB. If we go back to the no, okay, if you don't have a non-research relationship, then the next question is, what kind of people are you working on? And it's not that there's anything wrong with working with mentally challenged or, you know, limited language skills. It's that sometimes they need a more involved consent process than handing them a piece of paper which they may or may not understand. So then if you say you're not working with any of the following populations, you're going to jump to a slide 2 down. If you are working with them, we ask you if you have a more involved consent process. If you say yes, then you're going to go on. If you say no, you're going to get that soft stop again, and somebody's going to want to look and make sure that the way you're recruiting these people is something so you know you're getting voluntary informed consent. So we're going to go to that, back up to the top, to the no. You're not doing any interaction, intervention, or analysis of existing data samples. And really where we're headed is the information individually identifiable? Because if you're getting de-identified pre-existing data, the Office of Human Research Protection says because that's not privately identifiable information, right? It's de-identified, you don't need human subjects. So if you're doing a secondary analysis of already collected data without identifiers, you do not need to go through this process. If you are getting identifiable data and it's private, then you're going to go back into the loop which says you do need to go through IRB. So then if we went through the no conflicts, no non-research relationships with subjects slide, and we said we didn't have any, and then we have a consent process as opposed to a consent form for populations that might need have some vulnerability. We end up here. Yes, the activity is research involving human subjects. And so now we need to rule out some special populations. Are you using children under 18? Are you planning on using research on prisoners? Are you going to be doing research on pregnant women? And by that we mean specifically on pregnant women or fetuses, not that you're on a college campus and you're doing surveys and some of the people who may do the survey happen to be pregnant. So it's specifically doing research on pregnant women. All of those populations have extra protections in the regulations. There's only one place where there's an exemption that applies, and that applies to children, and most universities don't have much research that involves that. So if you're using any of those populations, you need to contact your IRB because you're probably not going to be exempt. If you're not using children, pregnant women, fetuses, or prisoners, Then the next question is, are you going to be doing research in one of the following categories? And these are the 5 exempt categories. And so if you're planning on doing a blood draw, and you read through these categories, you'll see that it doesn't fit into any of the categories. And so blood draws are not exempt. So if your research doesn't fit into one of the categories, you're not exempt. And I should mention that for purposes of the demonstration, we're also testing projects that got an expedited determination because it's as important to find out that the wizard says yes for things that are exempt as it is to make sure that it says no for things that are not exempt. So some of you, many of you, should be coming out at this point and having it say you're not exempt. And then you're done. If you are doing one of those kinds of research, the next slide asks you to pick which kind of research you're doing, and for purposes of this, we picked B, research using tests, survey procedures, interview procedures, or observation of public behavior. And so you're going to pick which category you think you fit into. You'll go to that, and it says an exemption may apply. Does the research only involve use of educational test procedures, interview procedures, or observation of public behavior? And if you say no, so let's say you're going to do an interview, but then you're going to draw blood. Well, then the answer is no, because you're doing something that's both the interview procedure and something else. And if you say no, it's not exempt. If you say yes, because you're just doing the interview or survey or educational test, that long question is really saying, is there something that could be revealed about an identified person that could get them into trouble? So if you're going to be one of our NYU researchers who studies crystal meth use, and he's going to have that person's name on the questionnaire that says how much crystal meth they're using and where they buy it and where they sell it. Well, clearly, if someone got a hold of those interviews, that subject could get into legal trouble for their for describing their crystal meth use. So if you're going to have a sensitive topic and you're going to have identifiers with it, the research is not exempt. If he does that exact same survey at Gay Pride Parade, which he does, and there are no identifiers on the surveys, and there are tens of thousands of gay people at these, and so you can drop your survey in the box and no one will ever be able to figure out it belongs to you, then you would say no, and now you know that your research is exempt. The next question is, are there more things that might be involved in this? Are you doing surveys, and are you going to look at some existing shelf data and link the two up? And if you say no, then the research is really exempt. If you say yes, then you go back to that previous slide and pick the next category. And then finally, there is one exemption that may apply. Sorry, let's go back. Oops, sorry, back too many. There is one exemption that may apply, and that's with publicly appointed officials. And if they're publicly appointed officials, then the research can go ahead and be exempt. And if it's not, then the research is not exempt. If they're identifiable, it may be exempt if they're not identifiable. So that's the whole tract for that section B, research using education. It's about the same number of questions for the other tracks. There are a few additional questions that IRBs wanted put in. How are you planning on recruiting? That we didn't put on the slide, but this is the basic tract. It doesn't take that long to go through. There are email addresses if you have questions or comments that you'd like to put forth. And I'm hoping that this gets you over the unknown portion of this and we can get the faculty to do this, because until we have enough data to show that this works, you're going to be stuck going through your IRB. Good luck. If you need to contact me directly, I can be reached at jam2@nyu.edu. Thank you for your participation.